Hello, my name is Michelle Buchberger and I'm delighted to be here today to talk to this interdisciplinary research forum. The topic of my discussion today will be a brief overview of using the broad model to promote interdisciplinarity. As I said, my name is Michelle Buchberger and I have been involved in interdisciplinary studies since about 2009 when I was asked to design and implement a Bachelor of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies at my institution. And I'm also the co-author of an Introduction to Interdisciplinary Studies with my co-authors Alan Repko and Szostak. My goal today is to talk about how the broad model specifically can help you to promote interdisciplinary work both in your own writing and also in the undergraduate classroom. I say undergraduate because that's the area of teaching with which I am the most familiar, but it could be equally adopted for graduate work. I'd like to start off with a definition of interdisciplinarity to help distinguish it from its often conflated neighbor, multidisciplinarity. The difference between the two being that interdisciplinarity draws on disciplinary perspectives and integrates their insights to create a more holistic understanding of complex real-world problems, where that integration is absent in multidisciplinarity, which is really more of a combination of insights. I always start off with my undergraduate classroom with talking about why we need to do interdisciplinary work. The fact that our knowledge of the world has been fragmented and divided very much between the cognitive domains of social sciences, humanities, and the natural sciences. Now, with my audience today, I'm sure you're very familiar with those cognitive domains and the disciplines within them. But I do find in the undergraduate classroom, it's worthwhile to do an activity or to discuss those different disciplines, what they are, and how they fit into our broader understanding and knowledge of the world. I also talk about the fact that each discipline is different, and that there are 5 elements that make the disciplines unique. It's worth spending some time talking about when we integrate insights, what are we actually integrating? Well, we're integrating what different disciplines have written about a particular topic, and the fact that they will have a different view on that topic is very much down to the fact that the different disciplines have different elements. They study different phenomena. That's the obvious one, but it is worth saying that they will have a different perspective on a topic because maybe what they actually study is a slightly different area of focus from the complex problem that you're dealing with. And equally, they have different assumptions about the world. They have their own theories, their own methods of how they do their work, from experimentation to close reading, and they're all going to be very different. And obviously then the information that they develop on a particular topic will be different based on the methods that they use. They also even have their own epistemologies, how they recognize knowledge, how they recognize what is true and knowable to them. And so those 5 different elements will make what a different discipline has to say about a particular topic different. So the broad model is widely used in instrumental interdisciplinarity, and I like this particular way of going about my work because if we use the broad model, it helps us to make sure that we use the right disciplines, that we don't miss out any insights that might be valuable to us. It's very systematic and methodical, and I really like that. It also generates artifacts for assessment. If, like me, you are responsible for assessment, it can be very helpful to have this very systematic and explicit way of doing the work to make sure that what you do can be measured. So there are 6 steps in the broad model, and I'm going to talk briefly about each one of those steps. So I won't read them all to you because we will be going through them one at a time. I will note that there is a 10-step broad model that's used very much for graduate students, but I'm going to be focusing on this 6 steps of the broad model for my presentation today. So we're going to start by defining the problem. And you might want to just kind of think how you would use this model in your own research. So kind of come up with a complex problem, or maybe a research area that you're dealing with right now, to be appropriate for our study in the broad model. It has to be complex. And as scholars of literature, most of the work we do is dealing with complexity, so that's not a problem. And it obviously needs to benefit from using interdisciplinary inquiry. So all of the insights wouldn't necessarily fall within one disciplinary domain, and it can't be resolved. So the example that I always give my students is, yes, photosynthesis is complex, but it really doesn't fall within the realm of more than one discipline unless you consider like biology and chemistry. But it's been resolved. I mean, photosynthesis is pretty much a known complex problem now, so it wouldn't be appropriate for interdisciplinary inquiry. Some examples of student work, very briefly, these would all be appropriate for interdisciplinary inquiry because they're complex, we don't have a solution for them, and you can certainly see how bringing in different disciplinary perspectives would be beneficial. So, for example, why do people litter? Here was a student that was really interested in the K-pop phenomenon from Korea. Why do so many K-pop idols and their fans have eating disorders? So students, this is a criminal justice major who was interested in serial killers. So, and in your own work, obviously, you would sketch out the complex problem that you would like to investigate. One of the things that I also really like about this topic and the broad model is that there are criteria that are provided so that you can actually go through and figure out whether or not you've actually met the goals of each step. So the criteria can be really helpful to make sure that you have successfully addressed that first step. For example, have you stated the problem? Have you clearly defined the scope? Have you avoided things like your own personal bias, your jargon that's disciplinarily focused? And have you avoided including your own personal bias in the question statement? And is this does it answer the so what question? What that means is, does it have some relevance beyond your own personal interest? In the second step, we'll justify an interdisciplinary response. And in the second step, we state the question, we explain why it's complex, we make sure that we are determining that more than one discipline can be used to investigate this complex problem. No other discipline has solved the question, and that it is an important question that is an unresolved problem. And again, I'll encourage students to kind of workshop their question, and the sticky notes are different areas of the question that the student might like to investigate. And again, that's kind of evincing the complexity inherent in the question. There's no argument that any of these questions are not complex enough, but by asking other students for their input, they can sometimes evince other areas that students might like to consider in their question. So these are all some examples that students have investigated in the past. In the next step, we actually look at what disciplines might be useful in investigating this complex problem. So looking at climate change, for example, and then I ask students to consider, well, which disciplines do you think would be relevant? And they will use sticky notes, and you could talk about which disciplines might be relevant, or in your own work, which disciplinary perspectives might be helpful. And again, here, the criteria, have you identified which disciplines are potentially relevant, and then narrow it down to which disciplines are definitely relevant. And we do that actually in the next step, where we go and do a library research to look at the disciplines that we've decided are potentially relevant. Now we need to find out which disciplines have actually published on our complex problem. Now, I'm talking to an audience of experienced researchers, so I don't have to spend any time helping you understand how you would find journal articles that would be relevant to an investigation of a complex problem, making sure that you have insights that have been written from different perspectives. But I do have to spend quite a lot of time with my undergraduates explaining to them how they could make sure that the insights they're finding are indeed from those different disciplinary perspectives. And I encourage them as well to use a cataloging tool of their own devising or something like this, where they can actually catalog the insights that they found, the articles, the key insights, that's the key ideas that they mine from those articles, and then they populate a table such as this, also evaluating the insight, how helpful it is for them. So by the time they have finished this step, here is an example of a complex problem that one of my students worked through. They have a table that looks something like this. And I'll just broaden my scope here so you can see it. Again, I won't go through it in some detail, but you can see that they have some disciplinary perspectives identified here. The key insight or key idea that comes from that journal article, and then how helpful it is, so that when they get to actually write this up, they focus on only taking to the next step, step 5, the articles and the insights that are valuable to their exploration. And again, you can see that the criteria for step 4 is provided there. In step 5, obviously the most difficult part of the 6-step process is actually beginning the integration. And this is why it's helpful to talk about those elements of a discipline before we get going, because you can see words like phenomena, assumptions, and theories are the way that we actually break up the insights to actually then put them on a table like this so that we can compare them. So we'll take each key insight from each article and we'll ask ourselves the question, what is the main argument? So what is the key idea in this article? What phenomena is typically studied by that discipline from the particular perspective that this article comes from? Then, what are the assumptions that that particular discipline has about the world? Are there some key theories that come from that discipline mentioned in the article? And so on. And the reason that we're compiling this table is that when we get to looking at this final column, we can actually look at the ways in which the different insights either agree with each other or conflict with each other. But we also then are privy to whether or not that conflict or coherence might be due to the fact that they do their work in a different way. They have different research methods, that they even maybe have different epistemological differences, that they have different assumptions about the world. And you can see by an example here, here's a student that looked into water fluoridation, and you can see that he or she has actually identified key ideas, different assumptions made by the discipline, the different methods used, and then they've actually used that final column to compare the insights among the different insights and the different disciplinary perspectives. And you can see this particular student looked at factory farming, for example. And here is one about Alzheimer's. So in this step, that table is invaluable because it really helps students identify the ways in which the disciplinary perspectives that they found can be integrated, but the insights that they produce to actually take the next step to actually integrate and then talk about those, it is helpful to know about those different components so that you know if a disciplinary insight on a childhood obesity disagrees with one if it's written from a biological perspective, maybe disagrees with one that's written from a